The final tendrils of asphalt gave way to a winding track, a ribbon of crushed stone swallowed by ancient hedgerows. My determination, a brittle shield against the city's recent ravages, hummed beneath my skin. I was Blake, shedding the skin of a life too small, too loud, too utterly broken. This inheritance, this isolated farmhouse deep in the English countryside, was not just a property. It was a promise whispered in the quiet chambers of my own mind, a clean slate etched into acres of forgotten land. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, felt like a balm, yet carried an undertone of something wild, untamed. The farmhouse emerged from a gathering mist, a silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Its gables, sharp as ancient teeth, clawed at the clouds. Stone walls, the color of old bones, rose 3 stories high, draped in ivy that clung like a second living skin. No lights gleamed from its dozens of windows, each pane a dark, unblinking eye. It stood alone, utterly alone, save for a few skeletal trees that bowed in silent deference. A shiver, not entirely from the chill of the evening, traced its way down my spine. This was not merely old, it felt ancient. A place that had witnessed more than generations, perhaps centuries, of silent watching. Unlocking the heavy oak door was like breaking a seal. The hinges groaned a long, mournful complaint, and the air within was stagnant, thick with the scent of dust, decay, and something else. Something metallic, like forgotten blood, or perhaps just old iron. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a cavernous hall, its floorboards creaking under my weight. Cobwebs, thick as spun sugar, hung from the high ceilings, swaying gently in the disturbance of my breath. This was not simply a house. It was a mausoleum of memories awaiting its next occupant. My first hours were a blur of unpacking essentials and battling the encroaching quiet. I tried to dismiss the feeling, the prickle on my neck, as mere nerves. New beginnings often brought such phantom anxieties. Every creak of the old timbers, every sigh of the wind through ill-fitting panes, seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister intent. A brief drive to the nearest village earlier had offered little comfort. A cluster of stone cottages huddled around a square, their windows like wary eyes. The few villagers I encountered, a shopkeeper with eyes too sharp, a farmer who simply stared, offered terse replies, if any. Their gazes lingered, not with curiosity, but with an unnerving, almost possessive intensity. It was as if they knew something I didn't, a secret shared silently amongst them, and my presence was an unwelcome disruption. The air in the village had felt thick, weighted, as if a collective breath was being held. The journey there had been winding, the road barely more than a bridle path, but the destination was worth it. Standing at the ocean shore at night with stationary waves, I felt a momentary peace. The vast expanse of the dark water, the rhythmic hush of the unmoving tides, offered a stark, beautiful contrast to the ancient brooding land I had just left. The air was crisp, tasting of salt and freedom. For a few precious moments, the weight lifted. I watched the silvered surface, the faint shimmer where the moon should have been, and imagined the world stretching out, boundless and indifferent. It was a brief, fragile illusion of escape. I was trying to find the main fuse box, hoping to restore some light, when my fingers brushed against a loose floorboard in a forgotten pantry off the kitchen. It lifted easily, revealing a small cavity. My heart gave an unexpected lurch. Inside, nestled in the dust, was not a journal, but a small, intricately carved wooden box. No hinges were visible, no obvious latch. It was a seamless piece, bound by something that felt like dried leather, crisscrossing its lid and sides. They were not words I recognized, nor patterns I had ever seen. They seemed to writhe, almost alive under my touch. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the wood. This was not a quaint family heirloom. This was something else entirely. The box felt heavy, not just with its physical weight, but with an unseen burden, a history that pulsed with a quiet, terrible energy. My breath hitched. The crushed stone track ended abruptly at a gate of wrought iron, rusted into intricate lacework. Beyond it, the farmhouse waited, a silhouette against the bruised evening sky. It was larger than the photograph suggested, a sprawling beast of gray stone and dark timber, its windows like vacant eyes. A shiver, not entirely from the chill, traced its way down my spine. This was it then, my new beginning. I fumbled with the ancient padlock, its cold metal biting my fingers until it surrendered with a reluctant click. The gate groaned open, a sound like a forgotten lament. Each of my footsteps echoed, swallowed, then spat back by the high ceilings. I ran a hand over a wooden banister, the grain smooth beneath my touch, yet somehow alien. I scrubbed away layers of grime, aired out rooms heavy with the scent of stagnation, and tried to infuse the space with my own fragile presence. I told myself the creaks and groans were merely the house settling, the sighs of ancient timbers adjusting to new weight. Or perhaps my own mind, still unwinding from the city's frantic hum. It was gone before I could properly turn, a fleeting smear against the wall. A trick of the light, I decided, rubbing my tired eyes. The house was old, full of nooks and unexpected angles. My imagination, overstimulated by solitude, was playing tricks. Sleep offered little respite. My dreams became a swirling tapestry of unsettling imagery. Vast, empty fields under a sky the color of bruised plums. The distant, rhythmic thrumming of something unseen, and a pervasive sense of being watched. I'd tell myself it was stress, the upheaval of a new life, the isolation. I was Blake, resilient, shedding the old skin. I would not succumb to fancy. My first foray into the village was an exercise in strained pleasantries. The shopkeeper, a woman with eyes like polished stones and a face weathered by sun and unspoken thoughts, regarded me with a gaze that lingered a fraction too long. Her questions were polite, yet held an undercurrent of something else. A quiet assessment. "New to the area, are we?" she'd asked, her voice flat, devoid of genuine curiosity. "That old place, it's been empty a long while." Her words hung in the air, waited. Their conversations, once a low murmur, ceased altogether. I ordered a drink, feeling the collective weight of their stares on my back, a prickling sensation that raised the hairs on my neck. No one met my gaze directly, yet I knew I was being observed, judged. Their silence was not welcoming. It was a wall, thick and unyielding. The unsettling occurrences at the house began to escalate subtly. I'd hear a faint scratching from behind the walls, a rhythmic tick-tick-tick that would cease the moment I focused on it. One evening, seeking an escape from the suffocating presence of the farmhouse, I drove. I parked the car and walked towards the sound of the sea, my boots crunching on the shingle. The moon, a sliver of bone, cast a spectral sheen across the water. The effect was profoundly disquieting. The natural rhythm of the ocean, a constant, comforting roar, was absent, replaced by this unnatural stasis. It felt wrong, fundamentally wrong. I looked around, a sudden, irrational fear seizing me. The few distant lights of the village seemed too far away, too dim. A flicker of movement caught my eye. On a rocky outcrop further down the shore, almost swallowed by the gloom, I thought I saw a figure. Attentive, facing me, watching. I stood frozen for a long moment, the unmoving waves before me, the silent figure behind the veil of night. A gnarled tree? My mind, already frayed by the house, was conjuring specters. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the shingle. The ancient secret, whatever it was, felt closer, its breath on my neck. The gate groaned, a rusted protest against my touch, then swung inward with a mournful sigh, inviting me into the encroaching gloom. The crushed stone track, slick with recent rain, led a winding path to the farmhouse. A beast of gray stone and dark timber that now loomed larger, its vacant windows like eyes watching my hesitant approach. A chill, not entirely from the evening air, traced a spider's path up my spine. This was it, my new beginning. The heavy oak door, studded with black iron, resisted at first, then yielded with a shriek that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. I spent the first night in a fitful, dream-haunted sleep, the house groaning around me like a sentient thing. I told myself it was the natural settling of an old structure, my nerves frayed by the journey and the sheer isolation. But a persistent, low hum, like a distant, massive engine, seemed to resonate from deep within the earth beneath the floorboards, vibrating through the very mattress beneath me. It was too constant, too rhythmic, to be dismissed as mere imagination. The next morning brought a false sense of reprieve. Sunlight, weak and watery, filtered through grimy windows, exposing the layers of neglect. I began the arduous task of unpacking, the mundane act, a desperate anchor against the rising tide of unease. I placed a mug on the kitchen counter, turned to retrieve a box of tea, and when I looked back, the mug had shifted, now sitting precisely in the center of a dust ring I hadn't noticed before. Later, in the sitting room, a heavy tome, one of many lining the shelves of ancient leather-bound volumes, slid from its perch and landed with a soft thump on the worn rug. No draft, no tremor. My voice sounded alien, fragile. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but the space behind me was empty, filled only with the dust motes dancing in the weak light. It was a trick of the light, I told myself. A tired mind playing games. They were faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, or the soft sigh of a distant breeze. But they grew, coalescing into indistinct murmurs, just beyond the threshold of understanding. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very air, weaving a tapestry of sound that spoke of ancient sorrow and coiled malevolence. I strained to decipher them, but the words, if they were words, remained just out of reach, a maddening, tantalizing secret. My determination, though frayed, had not yet broken. This wasn't just an old house. Something was here, and I needed to understand it. My thoughts kept returning to the ornate, iron-bound journal I had found tucked away in a hidden compartment of the antique desk in the study. Its leather cover was brittle, its pages yellowed and fragile, smelling of dried herbs and forgotten earth. I carried it to the kitchen, the only room with a functional lamp, and spread it open on the scrubbed pine table. The script inside was an archaic hand, dense and flowing, interlaced with intricate, disturbing drawings. My fingers traced the first symbol, a jagged, interlocking pattern of lines that seemed to writhe, reminiscent of roots or veins, culminating in an eye-like circle at its center. It was repeated on almost every page, sometimes alone, sometimes part of a larger, more complex design that hinted at a ritualistic purpose. The fragmented lore began to reveal itself through the faded ink. I was no longer in the farmhouse. The air was frigid, carrying the faint metallic tang I'd noticed in the house. They simply hung, frozen in their towering crests, silent, unnervingly still, as if time itself had ceased for them. The only movement was a slow, deliberate undulation in the very fabric of the air. A breath that wasn't mine. A pulse that wasn't human. Then, as abruptly as it began, the vision snapped back, and I was again in the farmhouse kitchen, the journal still open before me. The hum from beneath the floorboards intensified, vibrating through the table, through my very bones, a monstrous thrumming that seemed to echo the stationary waves of my horrifying vision. Sacrifice. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. The symbols, the lore, the terrifying vision. It was all weaving into a single horrifying tapestry. This wasn't just a house. It was a locus, a place where something unspeakable had been worshipped, something that now stirred, roused by my presence. And the journal, I realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just a record. It was a key. I was not alone, and whatever was here, it knew me. The journal lay splayed on the table, its ancient pages a roadmap to my undoing. The grotesque etchings, the frantic script, the terrifying vision of a grasping, hungry presence. It all coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. I had to leave. Determination, cold and sharp, cut through the tendrils of fear. My boots thudded against the flagstones, a desperate rhythm echoing through the silent house as I made for the front door. The air outside was a heavy, damp cloak, smelling of wet earth and something else, something metallic and ancient, like blood long dried in the soil. I fumbled with the key, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and yanked open the driver's side door of my car. The engine, usually a reliable growl, only offered a series of weak, pathetic clicks. I tried again, turning the key with a furious twist. Nothing. Just the hollow thunk, thunk, thunk of a dying battery, or perhaps something more insidious. I opened the bonnet, peering into the tangle of wires and metal, but I knew nothing of engines. The faint scent of something burnt, like ozone, stung my nostrils. It wasn't just dead, it felt wrong. Frustration gnawed at me. My phone. Of course. I snatched it from my pocket, the screen a brief, reassuring glow in the dim light. I tried to call the emergency services, then a colleague, then even the estate agent, anyone who might offer a lifeline. No signal. Not a single bar. The screen mocked me with its empty icon, a digital tombstone to connection. The world beyond this property had simply vanished. I was isolated, but I wouldn't surrender. The nearest village was perhaps 3 miles away. I would walk. I would find help. The road, a narrow ribbon of cracked tarmac, wound through a tunnel of ancient trees. Their branches interlaced overhead, blocking out the last vestiges of twilight, plunging me into a premature night. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale ale and wood smoke. A few weathered faces turned to me, their gazes slow, appraising. I approached the counter where a burly, red-faced man was wiping glasses. "Excuse me," I began, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the hushed room. "My car's broken down, and my phone has no signal. Is there a landline I could use? Or perhaps someone who could give me a lift to the nearest town?" The publican set down a glass with a deliberate clink. His eyes, the color of peat, held mine. "Broken down, you say? That's a shame, that is." He wiped his hands on his apron. "No landline here, not since the old one rusted out. And as for lifts, long drive to the town it is. Best you head back to your place, Blake. Get a good night's rest. Things look clearer in the morning." His words, though seemingly benign, carried a strange, heavy finality. His eyes never left mine, and in their depths, I saw not concern, but a quiet, knowing watchfulness. The other patrons had returned to their drinks, but I felt their presence, a collective, silent assessment. No one offered help. No one even suggested a mechanic. The air grew thick with unspoken understanding. I was not welcome to leave. I was trapped. Each rustle in the hedgerows, each creak of a branch, seemed to mock my futile attempts at escape. My fingers, still trembling, traced the arcane symbols on a newly discovered page. It detailed a harvest of the deep, a ritual of replenishment for the land, for the ancient root. The text spoke of a chosen vessel, a newcomer whose presence would awaken the slumbering entity, whose essence would nourish its resurgence. My essence. My arrival wasn't an accident. It was an invitation, a summoning. The words blurred, then sharpened, coalescing into a horrifying clarity. The land thirsts and the sea waits. The offering must be complete before the stationary waves claim their due. Stationary waves. The phrase echoed in my mind, an unsettling discord. Driven by an instinct I couldn't comprehend, a pull as strong as the tide, I found myself walking away from the house, through the gnarled fields, following a barely discernible path that led not towards the village, but in the opposite direction, towards the coast. The path ended abruptly at a low, crumbling stone wall, beyond which lay a vast expanse of shingle and sand. The immensity of it was breathtaking, terrifying. The moon, a sliver of bone, cast an anemic light across the water, illuminating a spectacle that defied all natural law. The waves, usually a restless symphony of motion, were frozen. They stood like immense glassy sculptures, towering walls of water caught mid-crest, their foam-crested peaks unnaturally still. The air was heavy, charged with an inexplicable energy. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. And the walls, I now understood, were not made of stone, but of something far more ancient, far more powerful than I could ever hope to escape. I was not just trapped, I was being prepared. My own breath plumed, a fleeting ghost against the unmoving expanse of water that mimicked ice, yet held the dark, unfathomable depth of the sea. The realization, stark and cruel, had pierced me moments ago. I was not merely in a strange place. I was caged, and the bars of this prison were woven from something far more insidious than iron. Only the dull throb of my own pulse, a frantic drum against the backdrop of an utterly dead world. My eyes, strained against the gloom, traced the rigid, sculpted peaks of the waves, caught mid-crest, their foam frozen into ghostly filigree. It was a tableau of arrested motion, a violent instant held captive for eternity, and it was watching me. My gaze drifted along the shore, seeking an edge, a break in the unnatural stillness. The sand beneath my boots felt wrong, too fine, too absorbent, as if it drank sound and light, leaving only a muted echo of my steps. A low hum began to vibrate in the very marrow of my bones, a deep, resonant frequency that was not audible but felt. It started as a faint tremor, then intensified, a pressure building behind my eyes, pushing against the fragile walls of my skull. The air seemed to thicken, growing viscous, making each inhale a struggle against an invisible weight. Then, it began. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift. At the furthest reach of my vision, where the stationary waves dissolved into the deeper black of the horizon, a distortion shimmered. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, desperate to dispel the illusion. But it remained, growing, coalescing into a wavering column that rose from the heart of the frozen ocean. It was not solid, not liquid, not gas. It was a visual tremor, a column of pure, concentrated wrongness that pulsed with the silent hum now reverberating through my entire being. It had no definite shape, yet my mind struggled to impose one, throwing up fleeting images. A twisted spire, a skeletal hand reaching, a gaping maw. Each fleeting form was more grotesque than the last, and none quite fit, leaving only the terrifying certainty that I was witnessing something utterly alien to my understanding. My vision began to swim at the edges, the rigid lines of the stationary waves softening, blurring, then momentarily rippling. It was a sound that existed only in the cavern of my mind, yet it felt as real as the grit beneath my boots. The column of distortion pulsed faster now, expanding, stretching, not moving towards me in a physical sense, but rather enveloping the space. The air around me grew heavy with a cloying scent, like wet earth and stagnant water, mingled with something acrid and metallic, like old blood. My legs, rooted to the spot by an invisible force, trembled violently. This was no trick of the light, no product of an overactive imagination. This was real, horrifyingly real. The entity, the thing that had waited, had watched, was now manifesting, reaching out, touching my perception, twisting the world around me into a nightmare. The stationary waves directly before me began to glow with a faint phosphorescent light, an inner luminescence that pulsed in time with the column in the distance. And within those frozen crests, I saw movement. My mind screamed. I stumbled backward, the sand sucking at my boots, threatening to pull me down. This wasn't just a house, or a land, or a cult. This was a presence, an ancient, hungry intelligence that had been awakened, and it was making itself known. And I, Blake, was its audience, its chosen vessel, perhaps even its next offering. I turned, breaking free of the invisible hold, and ran. The impossible, glowing ocean and its terrible, stationary waves burning into my mind, its silent, formless presence chasing me through the suffocating night. The world I knew would never look the same again. The frigid tendrils of that unseen presence had receded, but their icy grip lingered in the marrow of my bones, a phantom ache. My breath, ragged and shallow, tore at my throat as I stumbled backward, away from the empty space where the terror had coalesced. My gaze, wide and unfocused, swept the familiar contours of the living room, searching for some evidence, some tangible proof of what I had just endured. Nothing. Only the familiar dust motes dancing in the anemic lamplight, the worn patterns of the rug, the silence. Yet, the air itself felt bruised, heavy with a residue of malice. A profound, suffocating panic began to bloom within me. I needed air, needed distance, needed anything but the suffocating familiarity of these ancient rooms. The hinges groaned in protest as I yanked it open, spilling into the night. My feet pounded on the gravel path, then the uneven earth, carrying me through the skeletal hedgerows and over fields I barely registered. A low, rhythmic sigh that grew steadily louder, drawing me with an inexplicable pull. The waves, though present, seemed to hold their breath. A slow, deliberate heave and fall that felt utterly unnatural. They broke without fury, without rush, merely unfurling themselves onto the sand in long, languid ribbons of foam, then receding with a sigh that carried an ancient, weary resignation. There was no crashing roar, no vigorous spray, just this deliberate, almost ritualistic movement. It was a tableau of profound stillness, disturbing in its placid immobility. It was not confined. I was not safe. Running was futile. There was no escape. The answer, if one existed, lay back in the place of my torment. The house. It called to me, a low, insistent hum beneath the roar of the blood in my ears. I would uncover its secrets. My hands, still trembling slightly, ran along the rough plaster of the walls, seeking some anomaly, some hidden seam. I started in the oldest parts of the house, the ground floor, where the stone foundations felt like the very bones of the earth. The study, with its sagging bookshelves and the pervasive scent of decaying paper, yielded only dust. Then, the cellar. My gaze swept over the cluttered shelves, the forgotten tools, the stacks of decaying firewood. Nothing seemed amiss until I noticed it. A faint discoloration on one of the rough-hewn stone walls behind a stack of splintered crates. My heart began a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I shoved the crates aside, their wood groaning under my force, sending up a cloud of ancient dust that tickled my throat. And the mortar, in this particular section, looked newer, less weathered than the surrounding stone. My fingers, guided by a sudden, frantic energy, probed the edges of the discolored patch. One stone just above the floor shifted, barely perceptible, a tiny scrape of grit against stone. A gasp caught in my throat. I pushed harder, my breath held. It was not a small cavity, but a narrow, unworked passage leading deeper into the earth, beyond the known confines of the cellar. The air within was thick, stagnant, reeking of decay and something else, something ancient and deeply unsettling. Fear, profound and absolute, coiled in my stomach, threatening to make me retch. Yet a terrible, morbid curiosity held me captive. This was it, the hidden truth. The passage was not natural. It was clearly man-made, crudely dug, leading to God knew what horrors. It wasn't just a chamber. It was a conduit, a vein leading to the very heart of the malevolence that had woken with my arrival. My gaze, wide and unfocused, swept the familiar contours of the farmhouse parlor, now a theater of phantom terrors. The air, though no longer visibly disturbed, still hummed with the residue of that unseen presence, a vibrational echo in my very bones. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. This house, once a sanctuary, was a maw. I could not breathe its air, could not bear its suffocating weight a moment longer. An animal instinct, raw and unthinking, seized me. I stumbled through the threshold, my legs protesting with a leaden ache, past the silent, accusing portraits in the hall, and out into the biting night. The gravel of the drive crunched underfoot as I fumbled with the keys, the engine of the old Land Rover sputtering to life with a reluctant cough. I did not know where I was going, only that it had to be away. The headlights cut a frantic swathe through the inky lanes, hedgerows blurring into a tunnel of desperate escape. The farmhouse, a monstrous silhouette against the bruised sky, receded in my rearview mirror, but its influence clung to me like a shroud. Eventually, the winding lanes gave way to a broader road, and the scent of salt, sharp and clean, began to filter through the vents. The vehicle finally shuddered to a halt on a desolate stretch of ground overlooking the sea. I stepped out, the wind immediately tearing at my clothes, whipping my hair across my face. The surface, a bruised obsidian, reflected the sliver of a crescent moon, its light fractured into 1,000 shimmering shards that offered no warmth, no solace. It felt as though time itself had paused here, waiting. It was the old groundskeeper, his silhouette gnarled and familiar against the faint luminescence of the horizon. He moved with an unhurried certainty that belied the late hour and the remote location. My breath hitched. He had seemed a quiet, stoic man, a fixture of the land, offering terse advice about the soil and the seasons. There was no surprise in his gaze, only a profound, ancient knowing. The house, it stirs, doesn't it? Your arrival has quickened its pulse. My throat was dry, my tongue thick. What? A slow, unsettling smile stretched his lips, revealing teeth that seemed too large, too yellow in the dim light. It is the root, Blake. Older than the hills, older than the first fish that swam these waters. It sleeps, but it dreams. And its dreams are hungry. He gestured with a gnarled hand towards the unnaturally still ocean. These waves, they listen. You inherited a purpose, a lineage. The land remembers its own, and it recognizes the blood that flows through you. His gaze intensified, boring into me. For generations, your line has been instrumental. Keepers, some would say. Others, a sacrifice. The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Sacrifice. The entity wasn't just a presence. It was a primordial hunger, and the house, the land, the very community were its instruments. And I, Blake, was not merely an inheritor, but the intended catalyst, the vessel, the offering, the others, the community. I started, but he cut me off with a shake of his head. They are the faithful, the caretakers. They tend to the slumber, prepare for the awakening. They know the old ways, the true ways. The final lock. Your arrival, your very essence, is the spark that will fully awaken it. And the ritual. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a meticulously orchestrated trap, generations in the making. The helpful local, the quiet community, the picturesque isolation. All of it a carefully constructed stage for my own immolation. The groundskeeper, once a figure of harmless eccentricity, now stood before me, a terrifying prophet of my doom. His loyalty was not to me, but to the ancient, hungry thing that stirred beneath the earth. He took a step closer, his smile widening, no longer unsettling, but truly monstrous. Do not fight it, Blake. The land will claim its own. It always does. The wind howled then, a desolate cry that seemed to echo my own internal scream. The stationary waves before us seemed to pulse, a slow, almost imperceptible undulation that hinted at a vast, patient power stirring beneath the surface. The cold grip of understanding had solidified into a burning resolve. Immolation. The word echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind, a death knell that refused to be my own. My hands, still trembling from the revelation, clenched into fists, knuckles white against the pale skin. My mind, once fractured by fear, now sharpened with a desperate clarity. The local elders' cryptic warnings, the strange symbols etched into forgotten stones, the hushed reverence of the few villagers I'd encountered. All of it pointed to a deep, terrible connection between the entity and this very land. A root system reaching far beneath the soil, far beyond the farmhouse's foundations. If it was rooted, it could be uprooted, or, at the very least, starved. I moved with a newfound frantic energy, gathering what scant resources I possessed. A sturdy, dull knife, more for prying than for protection. A tattered map of the immediate coastline, salvaged from the house's dusty library, its edges brittle with age. My breath hitched in my throat as I considered the journey. But the answers, I knew, lay not within the confines of my inherited prison, but beyond its walls, in the places where the land met the wild, untamed sea. The wind, when it stirred, did not rustle leaves. It seemed to sigh with a mournful, drawn-out sound that scraped against my nerves. Trees, their branches skeletal against a sky devoid of stars, writhed as if in silent agony. Each step was a battle against the land itself, which seemed to rise up, grasping at my ankles, pulling at my resolve. The ground beneath my worn boots felt spongy, then suddenly hard as iron, shifting unpredictably. I pushed through a copse of gnarled oaks, their ancient forms bent into grotesque postures, their roots exposed like the veins of a dying beast. It was the entity, I realized, not just residing, but breathing through the very fabric of this place, its power radiating outwards, twisting the natural world into its own warped image. I was no longer merely walking. I was trespassing on hallowed, unholy ground. The journey was a blur of heightened senses and raw, unadulterated fear. Each moment a desperate push against the suffocating weight of the land's hostility. The wind here was a roaring beast, whipping strands of hair across my face, stinging my eyes with salt spray. And then I saw it. It was a sight that defied all natural law, a surreal tableau frozen in time. The immense body of water stretched out before me, black and fathomless under the ink-blot sky. Yet the waves, those mighty, ceaseless engines of the sea, were utterly still. No ebb, no flow, just monumental, unmoving walls of water, reflecting the distant, unseen moon with a sickly silvered gleam. The roar of the wind was the only sound, a stark contrast to the absolute, unnatural quiet of the petrified ocean. A wave of vertigo washed over me, a dizzying plunge into the impossible. This wasn't just a place, it was a wound in reality. My gaze, drawn by an irresistible pull, fell upon a cluster of jagged, sea-worn rocks at the foot of one of these stationary behemoths. They were not merely decorative. They were a language, a ritualistic script. This wasn't a place of weakness for the entity, but a focal point. The stationary waves were not a barrier to its power, but a demonstration of it, a testament to its profound dominion over nature. And the symbols, they were not for containment. They were for binding. My eyes scanned the intricate carvings, a horrifying realization dawning. One symbol, larger than the rest, repeated several times, seemed to depict a vessel, a human form, connected by tendrils to a larger amorphous mass. It was a depiction of the entity's feeding, its method of drawing sustenance, not just from the land, but from the very essence of life itself. And another symbol, etched with a stark, brutal simplicity, showed a single, sharp line severing the connection. Not destroying the entity, but breaking its hold, disrupting the flow. The stationary waves were not just a marvel. They were a ritual, a vast, ongoing act of power that consumed immense energy. And the symbols, I now understood, were not merely lore. They were instructions. Instructions for a desperate counter-ritual, a way to sever the entity's parasitic hold, to break the ancient covenant that bound it to this place and to its chosen sacrifices. The sheer audacity of it, the colossal effort it would demand, almost buckled my knees. But the alternative was immolation, and I would not yield. My gaze hardened, finding the specific point where the severing symbol was most prominently displayed, almost glowing with an inner, terrible significance. This was it. This was the vulnerable seam in their meticulously woven trap. The wind howled, the static waves loomed, and the symbols pulsed with a silent, ancient malevolence. My struggle had only just begun. The word immolation had not faded. It had become the very air I breathed, a phantom taste on my tongue, sharp as salt and ash. My blood, once a river of dread, now coursed with a frigid determination. I was no longer merely surviving. I was preparing to fight. The entity's presence was no longer subtle. It hummed in the very timbers of the farmhouse, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in my bones. Shadows, once mere tricks of the failing light, now seemed to possess a liquid weight, shifting and pooling with an unnatural volition. I could feel its tendrils reaching, testing the boundaries of my sanity. But the fire of my resolve burned hotter. I scoured the inherited volumes left by the previous owner, their brittle pages flaking like old skin. Most were obscure botanical texts or local histories, but one, bound in sun-faded leather, spoke in veiled terms of ancient practices, of offerings made to the land's hunger. It was within this tome, nestled between faded woodcut illustrations of flora long extinct, that I found it. A crude diagram, almost an afterthought, depicting a specific pattern of interwoven roots. A single stark phrase penned in a hand older than the book itself. The binding is not complete without the earth's own blood, drawn not from the root, from the forgotten stone. This was my revealed discovery. The cult sought to complete a ritual, to fully awaken and empower the entity. But there was a flaw, a forgotten element, a specific counteragent or weakness implied by the forgotten stone. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. The cultists had been busy, their hushed movements outside the house more frequent, their distant chants growing in intensity. A guttural harmony that burrowed into the stillness of the nights. I had seen the faint flicker of their torches through the dense hedgerows, heard the rhythmic beat of their drums carrying on the wind like a slow, insistent heartbeat. They were preparing. The final act was close. My gaze fell upon a small, tarnished silver locket, an heirloom I had found tucked away in a forgotten drawer. I had no idea if it held any power, but a desperate instinct urged me to keep it close, a tiny anchor against the growing tide of the uncanny. The forgotten stone. I had seen something similar in one of the property's oldest structures, a crumbling stone hut deep within the overgrown woods, used by the cultists as a makeshift shrine. It was a pilgrimage, a necessary trespass. This meant entering their space under the very nose of their preparations. I waited until the moon was a sliver, a mere memory in the vast star-peppered canvas above. The air was sharp, carrying the distant, lowing sound of the cultists' chant. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs, but my hands were steady as I gathered my meager tools. A rusty trowel, a length of frayed rope, and the locket clutched tight in my palm. The journey through the woods was a gauntlet of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, each sound a potential betrayal. The entity's power seemed to coalesce around me, the trees themselves appearing to twist and writhe, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, making each breath a conscious effort. I could feel the malevolence pressing in, a crushing weight that threatened to steal my courage. But the image of immolation, of myself as the sacrifice, spurred me onward. Finally, I reached the stone hut. A faint, cloying scent of something sweet and metallic emanated from within. The chanting was louder here, a hypnotic drone that threatened to unravel my thoughts. I peered through a narrow crack in the wall. There was no one present, only the lingering aura of their recent activity. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old blood and something acrid, like burnt herbs. My eyes quickly found it. A large, unadorned stone slab, deeply set into the earth floor, partially covered by a tattered cloth. It was ancient, worn smooth in places, and bore no markings. This had to be it. The forgotten stone. I knelt, my hands trembling as I pulled back the cloth. My fingers traced its surface, searching for a clue, a secret. There was a tiny, almost invisible fissure along one edge. My trowel, thin and sharp, found purchase. With a grunt, I leveraged it, and the stone, with a grating groan, shifted. Beneath it, nestled in the damp earth, was not another stone, but a small, petrified root, twisted and gnarled, resembling a miniature screaming face. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. This was the earth's own blood, the missing piece of the binding. I made my way back to the farmhouse, the petrified root clutched tight. The entity's presence felt even more agitated, as if it sensed my theft, my defiance. I had the counter-element, the means to sever the binding. But what would happen then? The stationary waves, frozen in their approach, seemed to hold their breath, mirroring the tension that gripped my own soul. Here, under the vast, uncaring expanse of the heavens, I felt a terrifying clarity. The choices were laid bare: fight or be consumed. The petrified root, hidden in my coat, felt like a lead weight, a promise and a curse. I was ready. The final preparations were complete. The gauntlet once thrown was now firmly grasped. My trowel, thin and sharp, found purchase. It wasn't a slab or a capstone, but a singular dark heart, pulsing faintly with a cold inner light. Beneath it, not earth, but a void. It was a passage, not dug by human hands, but carved by time and a patience that transcended millennia. A primal sound that vibrated through the very bones of the earth, echoing in my chest. The salt smell sharpened, no longer a hint, but an overwhelming presence, like standing on the lip of a vast, unseen ocean. Then, the tunnel ended. Not abruptly, but with a slow, widening aperture that spilled me out onto an expanse of damp, gray sand. Above, the sky was a bruised velvet, pierced by a few indifferent stars, but no moon. The water, usually a restless, churning entity, lay unnaturally still. Only the relentless rhythmic drone of the chant, now piercingly clear. They were there, in the very center, where the light seemed to coalesce into a pulsing orb, was a pit. And from that pit, a presence. It wasn't visible, not in any corporeal sense, but I felt it like a pressure in my skull, a clawing at the edges of my sanity. A profound, ancient hunger that had been stirring in the farmhouse, now fully awake and reaching. The cultists, their faces obscured by deep hoods, swayed in unison, their chanting growing louder, more fervent. Their voices, once human, now seemed to merge into a single inhuman roar, a sound of absolute devotion and terrible expectation. They held something aloft, something glinting dully in the hellish light. A blade. This was it, the climax of their ancient rite. And I, Blake, was either the unwitting witness or the final necessary ingredient. The stone vibrated, a frantic pulse against my skin, echoing the entity's awakening. It wasn't a compass. It was a counterweight, a binding. A sudden sharp crack rent the air, not from the cultists, but from the stationary waves. A fissure, like a hairline fracture in glass, appeared in one of the frozen crests, then another, spreading across the water's surface. The unnatural stillness began to tremble. The entity was not just present. It was breaking through. The sacrifice was imminent. I had to act. My mind, usually prone to doubt, was now a singular focused point of desperate will. It felt responsive, like a key or a lock. With a guttural cry ripped from my throat, I stumbled forward, sand grinding under my boots. The cultists, caught in their trance, barely registered my presence until I was almost upon them. One, then another turned, their hooded heads snapping towards me with an unnerving synchronicity. Their chanting faltered, replaced by a collective gasp, a hiss of outrage. The interloper. A voice, raspy and ancient, boomed from the leader. "Seize him." I didn't think, I reacted. My free hand instinctively found a loose rock, heavy and jagged, and I swung it wildly, a desperate, clumsy arc that connected with a cultist's shoulder. A grunt, a stumble, and the figure fell, disrupting the perfect circle. The chant sputtered, lost its rhythm. The stone in my hand pulsed violently, almost burning. It was a conduit, a counterspell. The reveal struck me with the force of a physical blow. The stone was not merely a key, but a fragment of the entity itself, broken off and bound long ago to keep the greater whole at bay. And now, its reintroduction, its collision with the awakening, could either complete it or shatter it. I charged the leader, a primal scream tearing from my lungs. The cultists, momentarily disoriented by my brazen assault, were still many. I twisted, elbowing my assailant, feeling the sickening crunch of bone. I reached the edge of the pit, the leader turning to face me, their face finally visible beneath the hood. Ancient, desiccated, eyes burning with a fanaticism that was terrifying to behold. A deafening shriek erupted from the pit, a sound that tore at the fabric of reality, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. The stationary waves shattered, sending shards of frozen water scattering across the shore like broken glass. The green fire exploded outwards, throwing me backwards, slamming me against the damp sand. The pressure in my skull intensified to an unbearable pitch, threatening to split my head in two. I lay there gasping, my body racked with pain, my mind reeling from the psychic assault. The shriek faded, replaced by a low, guttural growl, a sound of immense, wounded power receding. The leader lay crumpled near the pit, unmoving, their fanaticism extinguished. The remaining cultists scattered, their cloaked forms vanishing into the periphery of the night, their faith shattered, their purpose undone. The water began to churn, the distant roar of the true ocean returning, a natural cleansing sound. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, my vision swimming. I had done something. I had stopped it, or at least driven it back. But the cost, the thrust, the world tore. not with the rending of cloth or the splinter of timber, but with a sound far older, a groan from the very bedrock of existence. My arm, a conduit of desperate will, plunged into the pulsating darkness, seeking not to destroy, but to bind. The entity, half risen, a grotesque caricature of an ancient hunger, convulsed. Its form, a swirling vortex of shadow and malformed flesh, seemed to recoil, to shrink back into the maw from which it had almost fully emerged. A shriek, a cacophony of human despair and rage, erupted from the cultists. Their leader, his face a mask of thwarted fanaticism, lunged, his hands reaching for me, but it was too late. The pit, now a ravenous maw, wasn't merely closing. It was devouring. It pulled at the air, at the fading light, at the very essence of the ritual that had sustained it. And in that maelstrom, I felt myself caught, a tiny fleck in a storm of cosmic recoil. Then, the abrupt, jarring splash. My lungs burned, an inferno fueled by salt water and the phantom taste of ash. I gasped, sucking in the frigid air, coughing, my body convulsing as if trying to expel the horror that had taken root within me. Above, a sky choked with stars, a vast, indifferent tapestry of diamond dust, offered no comfort. The air tasted of brine and something else, something metallic and burnt, a phantom echo of the pit's acrid breath. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I pushed myself up. My right arm, the one that had been searing with pain moments ago, now felt strangely numb, yet impossibly heavy. It was a dead weight, a foreign limb. It was not the frantic gurgle of a river, nor the gentle lapping of a lake. This was something grander, more ancient. I turned my head. Its surface under the faint starlight was unnaturally still. The waves, instead of breaking and receding with their usual ceaseless motion, hung suspended, frozen in their crest, like monstrous glass teeth poised to devour the shore. They were stationary waves, a surreal, impossible sculpture of water, caught in an eternal, silent roar. My mind struggled to comprehend this impossible vista. The ocean shore at night with stationary waves. It was a tableau of profound wrongness, a testament to the disruption I had witnessed, had caused. My act, my desperate lunge, had ripped a hole in the fabric of what was real, and the world was struggling to mend itself, leaving these impossible scars. I lifted my right arm, the numbness giving way to a dull ache. The skin around the elbow was not merely bruised, but blackened, not by impact, but as if by an internal fire. It was a brand, a mark of my interaction with the unnameable, a permanent etching of the entity's touch. This wasn't merely a physical wound. It was a testament to a profound alteration, a scarring that went beyond the flesh. I had not destroyed the entity. I had merely pushed it back, sealed it, perhaps even used the very ritual meant to awaken it as a means of its temporary containment. It was not gone. It merely slept, a colossal, malevolent consciousness slumbering beneath the earth, beneath the impossibly still waves. The cultists. What had become of them? Had they been consumed by the pit's frantic retreat, their desperate faith turning to dust? I did not know, and a part of me was terrified to find out. The thought of them, still out there, still devoted to their unseen master, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. The farmhouse, my inheritance. It was not a gift, but a prison, a nexus. I could not go back, not truly. Even if I physically returned, a part of me would remain chained to that ancient soil, that malevolent presence. The entity slept. It remembered. It hungered. And one day, when the stars aligned just so, or when another unsuspecting soul sought a fresh start, another would inherit the house and with it, the sacrifice. I rose, my legs unsteady, my gaze fixed on the unnatural stillness of the waves. The world stretched before me, vast and indifferent, yet forever altered. I was alive, yes, but the cost had been immeasurable. The horror was contained, but not defeated, and I, Blake, was now its reluctant, haunted keeper. The vast, silent ocean, with its frozen waves, seemed to murmur a promise of that inevitable return.